All right, and welcome to episode 12 of Dimwits, Dipshots, Dufuses, and Dullards. And this is a bit of a special episode because we're focusing on Michigan, my state, and we're even getting local. So we're looking at U.S. Representative Jack Bergman, who apparently doesn't want to be that representative, of the people. So he's skipping town halls that might be critical of his performance, you know? So, a recent article was published in our local newspaper titled An Unhappy Group, and the additional titles Angry Residents Vent About Congressman Bergman. So, why would they do that? What's the deal with that? Well, Houghton residents are condemning Representative Jack Bergman's absence at the town hall for starters. It's one thing to have you know a lot of problems with a candidate and to be able to actually confront them about them, but if they're not even willing to show up to face whatever sort of comments, questions, or concerns that the constituents have, well, it becomes like a whole other issue, doesn't it? So over 150 residents from the Houghton area gathered today, or not today, but Tuesday. It was on Tuesday of this week, and it was at the Keweenaw Unitarian Universalist Fellowship on Bridge Street, and it was a grassroots town hall aimed at addressing U.S. Representative Jack Bergman's record. And despite being invited 2 weeks prior, Bergman did not attend, leaving constituents to express their frustrations to an empty chair adorned with his picture. And this actually isn't a recent thing, believe it or not. Bergman has had a long standing absence when it comes to events like this. So the anger has actually been building up for a little bit of time. As organizer Bill Fink said, well, he said that he spearheaded the event with no external funding, and Bill Fink is a retired National Park Service ranger from Portage Township. You know, the uh, the event happened at my neck of the woods, my stomping ground, so to speak. And Fink noted that Bergman's absence was no surprise. Since taking office in 2017, Bergman has not held a public town hall to engage with his constituents. Apparently, not even a single one. I mean, I'm basing that on the Daily Mining Gazette article, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are correct about that. His staff has routinely dismissed such grassroots gatherings, calling a similar event in Escanaba a political stunt. That's a little bit odd to call it a political stunt because, even if you are a Congress creature, you should be able to confront political stunts. You should be able to withstand them, not run away like a little biatch. You know what I'm saying? And he apparently refused another in Traverse City with the claim that it was funded by George Soros. They say everything is funded by George Soros, even this local event. That's a funny thing to think about. Like, George Soros he's everywhere and nowhere. He's funding even little town halls in my puny little city, according to Mr. Bergman and his paranoid fantasy. Well, I think he knows it's untrue. I don't think he's actually that delusional. Maybe he is, but you know, I think deep down a lot of these people know that they're lying or that they're wrong, but they have to run with these talking points because they tend not to have a whole lot else to ground their pathetic, ideology on other than just these paranoid accusations and conspiracy theories and just bullcrap. So these refusals by Bergman reflect a larger trend of elected officials avoiding unscripted public forums, a tactic that shields them from direct accountability, of course. And that's why they're like this. They don't like the idea of accountability. So the event became what Jack Bergman feared, partly because he was not there. It became a platform for frustration and demands. If he had been there to actually answer questions and maybe pacify the crowd and alleviate tensions and address concerns and all that kind of stuff, maybe he could have turned the ship around, so to speak. But the speakers seated at a table labeled "I am your constituent" voiced their concerns while addressing Bergman's photograph, which is actually kind of funny. I guess that does end up looking a bit like a stunt, but what can you do? He wasn't there. So it made sense to have a little bit of a symbol of Jack Bergman in his absence. So each speaker had 3 minutes to speak, and they made it clear they were unpaid by George Soros or anybody else. I, I mean, I couldn't imagine anybody actually, like paying all these randos from my puny little city to show up here and harass an empty chair. Like I think even George Soros would have additional things to spend money on other than that. And they maintain that they spoke only out of civic duty, which is something that Jack Bergman apparently doesn't have a whole lot of these days. A pocket-sized copy of the U.S. Constitution rested beside Bergman's photo. It was, you might say, a silent but powerful symbol of the promises constituents felt he had broken. And many accused Bergman of failing to uphold his oath of office. I'm actually going to name these people because they are named in the article. But if you somehow catch this episode and are one of these people and want me to strike your name from the episode, go ahead and let me know. I guess I could do it. But uh, one resident named Donna Armstead, who is a performing artist and educator from Lake Linden, criticized Bergman and his colleagues for enabling what she described as unconstitutional overreach. She said, or is quoted as saying, "A would be king and an unelected billionaire have repeatedly violated the Constitution," she said, questioning why Congress has not acted. Jennifer Slack of rural Houghton County, which again is where I live, echoed the sentiment, calling for Bergman's resignation. "You represent us," she said, "not Donald Trump. You are violating your oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States." And her statement drew some loud applause. So, there's a lot of criticism of Bergman's alignment with Trump, which again, he would have had an opportunity to address if he had been there. And Micah Hardin of Hancock, which is where I live, urged Bergman to step out of Trump's shadow and listen to all constituents regardless of background or ideology, meaning that, hey, even if these people had been all funded by George Soros or some other unscrupulous, source of vast wealth, well, you kind of still have a job to occasionally face questions from these people, even if they disagree with you. That's what a representative is actually supposed to do. And again, if he had shown up, there would have been an opportunity to maybe calm these people down, give them the appropriate answers, and all that kind of stuff. His comments, or the comments of Michael Hardin, they demonstrated widespread frustration over Bergman's alignment with Trump's policies, which have been widely criticized for exacerbating inequality and undermining democratic institutions. And not just Democratic Party institutions, mind you, but just the democratic nature of society. So there were also a lot of concerns over science and public health funding. Brendan Leddy, a Houghton resident, highlighted the real world consequences of Bergman's inaction. He spoke about his sister, a graduate student, whose research on AIDS had been frozen due to funding cuts. Quote, "This is not gender research, this is medical research about a disease that has killed thousands and thousands of people," Leddy said, expressing frustration that he was forced to address a photograph instead of the congressman himself. His blunt closing remark, "I'm sitting here and I'm expecting Jack Bergman, but all I'm seeing is jack shit." And, that captured the raw anger felt by many at this event. There was also a call for moral courage. So, Alan Salmi, whose family has deep roots in Houghton and Hancock, which again is where I'm currently living. Anyway, Salmi urged Bergman to show courage not on the battlefield as the retired Marine general had in his past military career, but in Congress. Quote, "You've got to take on a new kind of courage, not for the battlefield or the battlefield of conflict, but for the battlefield of Congress," Salmi said, highlighting the need for elected officials to confront systemic corruption and defend democracy, and also just to, answer questions and defend their own job, you know? So, my perspective on government accountability, you know, in the aftermath of this largely remains the same, Bergen's refusal to engage with his constituents epitomizes a failure of representative democracy when elected officials insulate themselves from public criticism and prioritize corporate interests over community needs. They demonstrate the inherent flaws of a system that concentrates power in the hands of a few. The grassroots town halls like this one in Houghton serve as a reminder that real democracy emerges from direct action and collective organization, not so much from elected officials who avoid accountability. You know, the the people who avoid accountability, they're ultimately going to be do nothings. They're going to hand the keys over to the ultra rich, as we have seen. And you know what? The ultra rich, they're going to crash the car, so to speak. So ultimately, when the system fails, and it so often will, it turns out that these decentralized community based decision making processes are more effective at addressing local concerns than unaccountable, cowardly, hierarchical government structures that mostly serve the wealthy and the powerful. So, events like the Bergman List Town Hall show that when people come together to voice their frustrations and demand accountability, they reclaim a measure of power, which is an essential step toward dismantling oppressive nonsense like, you know, co presidents Trump and Musk, and work on building alternative models rooted in mutual aid and solidarity. And that was the mood, the vibe at this town hall. So the fight for actual representation continues, and while Bergman's absence left many questions unanswered, the voices heard that night reflect a community unwilling to be ignored, So, as the political landscape grows more polarized and stupid, events like this reinforce the importance of holding elected officials accountable and pushing for a system where power rests with the people, not such disconnected politicians. So, all right, for now, I'm done with my comment on Bergman. We're going to look at the second segment of this episode of Quadruple D, and this entails looking at what I call the peripheral poop head of the week. And, it's actually a Democrat this time. His name is Lon Johnson. So, no, it's not a porn star. That definitely sounds like a porn star name, but it's Lon Johnson. And he is an apparent APAC puppet who was defeated by Jack Bergman. So I learned a little bit about him just today when I was researching into Jack Bergman's, run for office. He defeated Lon Johnson, and there was a scandal that's a little bit interesting, covered in an M Live article. Now, M Live means Michigan Live, and their article's titled Michigan Senate candidates were offered $20 million to drop race, challenge Rashida Tlaib. So the story is about a pro-Israel lobby group, really the biggest one, who allegedly offered $20 million to indeed oppose Rashida Tlaib and ostensibly others, who are similar to her. It's part of an ongoing effort to do that. An alleged ongoing effort, I suppose I technically have to say, but I think it's pretty well, demonstrated in other examples. But in this example, there's a little bit of rumor to it. But anyway, this story is about two Michigan Democratic Senate candidates who claimed they were offered, $20 million in campaign support from the leading pro-Israel lobbying group to abandon their Senate bids and instead challenge Rashida Tlaib, who is a Democrat from Detroit, in the primary. Hill Harper and Nasser Beydon, Beydoun, that's how that name is spelled. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. But anyway, they said the offers were made separately, but both were aimed to remove Tlaib, who is a Palestinian American and vocal critic of Israeli policies. And the objective was to basically remove her from Congress. So, the details of the alleged offers are interesting. Politico first reported that Harper, an actor and activist, and who actually voted in the last primary, was approached with the offer during a phone call, which he confirmed uh, as part of the article. So Baydown, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a prominent Arab American community leader and businessman who said he was approached by former Michigan Democratic Party Chair Lon Johnson, the peripheral poop head I'm talking about, and he received the same proposal on November 10th of that year. So Baydown stated that the offer included $10 million in bundled campaign donations and an additional $10 million in independent advertising support from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or APAC. According to Baydown, Johnson indicated that his stance on Palestine was not a concern. Quote, they basically said that even though you're pro-Palestinian, they don't have a problem with that. They just want Rashida out. So Baydown, who considers Tlaib a friend, rejected the offer and informed her of the meeting shortly after. So there was a denial and lack of independent verification. So that means that Lon Johnson denied Baydown's account, telling Politico, quote, That's just crazy. I didn't offer him $20 million or any other amount of money to run against Rashida. That's insane. Well, it turns out it's not such insane of an allegation because, you know, APAC has definitely been pumping money into campaigns against certain candidates. MLive attempted to reach Johnson for comment, but received no response. Harper's call has not been independently verified by MLive, and the identity of the donor involved was reported by Politico to be Lyndon Nelson, a Detroit area entrepreneur. Harper addressed the situation on X, or what cool people call Twitter, saying, quote, "This isn't about one person or one phone call. It's about a broken political and campaign finance system that's tilted towards the wealthy and powerful." So, yeah, this is about AIPAC's influence and the anti Tlaib campaign. AIPAC exerts considerable influence on U.S. foreign policy, especially regarding Israel, of course, because that's really the name of the namesake of the organization. It plays a significant role in shaping electoral outcomes through substantial financial contributions. The organization has committed $100 million to unseat Tlaib and three other progressive members of Congress known as the Squad. That includes Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley. All those lawmakers have been outspoken in their criticism of Israel and their advocacy for Palestinian rights. And AIPAC has labeled their positions as anti Semitic, a charge that Tlaib and her colleagues strongly deny, arguing that criticism of Israeli policies is not inherently anti Semitic, just like you could argue that criticism of, you know, Palestinians would not be inherently anti Palestinian, or criticism of Saudi Arabia or Iran or, of course, the United States. But that accusation is a long-standing AIPAC strategy or tactic or whatever you want to call it. AIPAC channels its influence through direct donations and massive independent expenditures, often supporting what they consider moderate and pro-Israeli candidates across party lines. Of course, the word moderate is being used loosely with the way I say it, but with the way the media would say it, they would consider it to be more accurate. But in recent years, AIPAC has expanded its political action by creating a super PAC, the darkly ironically titled United Democracy Project, which spent millions in Democratic primaries to defeat progressive candidates critical of U.S. support for Israel. The group's efforts to defeat Tlaib align with a broader strategy to marginalize dissenting voices in Congress who question U.S. military aid to Israel and advocate for Palestinian human rights, including the right to not be slaughtered in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. Rashida Tlaib's advocacy and targeting by pro Israel groups wouldn't be a huge surprise, which is why I don't discount the story much myself. Tlaib is the first Palestinian American woman in Congress. She's been a consistent critic of Israel's policies, particularly the treatment of Palestinians and ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories and, of course, the destruction of Gaza. She supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions or BDS movement, which seeks to apply economic pressure on Israel to end its occupation and guarantee equal rights for Palestinians. Her advocacy has made her a target for pro Israel groups, including AIPAC, which views her position as a threat to the bipartisan consensus that has long characterized U.S. support for Israel and whatever atrocities are being implemented by Israel. So, there are also implications for democracy and campaign finance, of course. The alleged offers to Harper and Baydown highlight the pervasive influence of money in U.S. politics, where wealthy donors and special interest groups can shape political outcomes. Harper's remarks about a broken political and campaign finance system, they point to broader concerns about how big money undermines democratic representation, allowing powerful lobbies to override the voices of ordinary voters, and AIPAC's aggressive spending in primaries, especially against these progressive candidates, illustrates how such influence often targets dissenting perspectives and limits the scope of policy debate in Congress. So, the bigger picture is that AIPAC's efforts to unseat Tlaib are part of a larger trend where pro Israel groups and other groups work to maintain a consensus in Washington by marginalizing critics and ensuring that candidates align with their views and remain in office. And of course, the obvious implication is that if the politicians start to veer too far away from the shadow of these big moneyed interests, well, then those candidates will probably be primaried. And this pattern raises serious concerns for advocates of free speech, Palestinian rights, and a more balanced U.S. foreign policy. The situation also underscores the need for campaign finance reform to reduce the outsized influence of money in politics and protect basic democratic principles. All right, so lastly, uh, for the Fetid Fever Dream Flashback of the Week segment, I'm just going to look again at Jack Bergman. So, the most notable controversy involving Jack Bergman centers on his actions following the 2020 presidential election. Despite the lack of evidence supporting widespread voter fraud claims, Bergman objected to the certification of Electoral College results on January 6, 2021. He defended his stance by citing concerns over, quote, irregularities, discrepancies, and usurpation of state election laws, advocating for an investigation into the election's integrity. Well, of course, that would be investigated many, many times, and all of the court cases that were brought really didn't have any merit. I think there was only one that had just some procedural uh, merit, but it wasn't something that would have affected the outcome of the election. It was just some procedural thing. But even after the violent events at the Capitol known as January 6th, Bergman maintained his position, expressing no regrets about his vote. And, you know, the rest is history, of course. Bergman's actions could be viewed as illustrative of the inherent flaws within governmental systems like ours. MAGA's reliance on coercion and constant deceit undermines individual autonomy and perpetuates oppression, because that's part of what lying actually does if you are lying to your constituents and implementing a lot of shitty policies at the same time. So Bergman's attempt to challenge the electoral process, despite a lack of substantiating evidence, that could withstand the scrutiny of a court of law or any legitimate factual analysis might be seen as an example of how political figures exploit their positions of authority for personal and partisan agendas, thereby eroding public trust in not only institutional legitimacy, but in truth and facts overall. Ironically, despite claiming to represent and strengthen law and order, Jack Bergman could be interpreted as reinforcing the anarchic critique that hierarchical systems are prone to corruption and manipulation. So, yeah, the party of law and order has actually eroded law and order and has made, a lot of people in the United States think they will eventually have to resort to other means to address issues because the democratic system just is not working as well as it should at the moment. So that's why you have things like that town hall, and people are increasingly scrambling because they know that their livelihood could be on the chopping block, with these Doge cuts or whatever, because they're going to go after the whatever sort of government benefits people might receive or have a chance of receiving, and that's if the public doesn't try to hold these people accountable, doesn't, demonstrate a willingness to, I don't know, take them to task and make some demands. So that's something we're right in the middle of, and it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out. So anyway, that's it for this episode. I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm going to call it a day and have a good one.